Let me give you a little proposition. Philosophers, this book, On Certainty, by Ludwig Wittgenstein, should not exist. It's not a book, which is kind of good because it's really bad. And I think it ought to have harmed Ludwig Wittgenstein's reputation, although Ludwig Wittgenstein's reputation is so overwhelming that no harm can come to it. And no matter how bad the stuff is, people will look at it as the deliverances of a deity. Right? But no, this is just a mess, okay? And I'm going to rag on it, and it's going to sound like I'm ragging on Wittgenstein for the positions he takes here. But actually, does Wittgenstein take any positions here? First of all, he contradicts himself over and over again. He takes both positions. He abandons them. He says over and over again he's just asking questions. Then he answers the questions. Then he gets rid of the answers to the questions. Back and forth and back and forth. All right. It's a rough set of notes as he worked toward doing some kind of book, paper, lectures on epistemology, worrying about G.E. Moore's proof of the external world. Here is a hand, and here is another. So there are things external to the mind. So the external world exists. If you know anything about me and philosophy, I think that's a really good argument. I love that argument. All right. But this whole book is it an attack on it or reaffirmation of it? Impossible to tell by the end. All right. It sure looks like an attack on it at the beginning, but not by the end. He affirms it and he contradicts it. Moore's arguments. I guess I'm not really going to run through the Moore arguments. But okay, so just to frame this out, these what became On Certainty were notes produced by Wittgenstein in the last couple of years of his life when he was extremely ill. And as he describes himself trying to return to philosophy and feeling good about the fact that he is. Right? But what I would describe these as the propositions of uncertainty, which are framed analogously to the Tractatus, or I mean, it's exactly the same form as the philosophical investigations, numbered paragraphs. But that is all editors here. He didn't do it that way. They assembled some of his fragments on epistemology into a book, numbered the propositions as if he had done this as a sequence, but he didn't at all. All right. And as if he was writing a book in analogy to the philosophical investigations, like this was going to be his next book. Now, maybe the epistemology would have been his next book, but this stuff is just the roughest of notes. And I don't think he even feels like he's gotten to the position that he will state and defend in some finished work on epistemology. And it's just a mess. It's just back and forth and back and forth. The writing is like pretty wretched and stuff like this. I am looking at the English translation, I guess. German on the facing pages, as they do with Wittgenstein. I mean, he himself says things. This is kind of famous. Let's see. Where is this? He says this in his notebooks, right? Among some of these fragmentary observations about Moore and so on, I do philosophy now like an old woman who's always mislaying something and having to look for it again. Now her spectacle, now her keys. And that's the flavor of this whole thing, man. And I say it's provisional, like this is not intended to be a book. And it would be good if it's not intended to be a book because, man, he does not... insofar as their positions here, they are implausible. But it would be a reasonable defense to say that there are no positions here, really. Okay. Now, as usual in Wittgenstein, as always in Wittgenstein, there are no arguments for anything, right? Are there arguments in the Tractatus? I guess there's a private language argument. Is it an argument? Would you frame it up in premises and conclusion in the investigations? He delivers oracularly rather than construct an essay to get you somewhere, let's say. Which is one thing that makes these very rough fragmentary notes seem plausibly like they're in Wittgenstein's authorship, because you could experience them as oracular pronouncements of the sort we get in the Tractatus and the investigations. Right, I actually am a Wittgenstein skeptic in various regards, but this book, I'm not even going to blame it on him, man. Right. And actually, that same section, like, I think that these, it's not that these came in sequence, but I think that they gave it, they put that little thing about, I do philosophy now like an old woman who's always mislaying something, in the middle of a couple of late fragments where he appears to return and agree with more. Lots of the late fragments appear to return and agree with more after all the earlier stuff, but it's not sequential at all. I mean, was it Anscombe and stuff, Rush Reese and stuff? I have this funny feeling that they left the part where he took it all back, did he though, to the end. But is that the way his thinking ended up? Where he's much more agreeable to more at the end of these 18 months spent thinking about epistemology or writing these fragments at the beginning? No idea, really. All right, but it does appear this way in this book. Maybe they just thought most people weren't going to get to the end of this book, and so they wouldn't see these passages or whatever, maybe. Except they had to know that this was scripture, I guess, for some. Boy, this is an achingly difficult to interpret scripture. If it's trying to tell you what to do or what knowledge is, it's leaving you nowhere, baby. But that's often the case with divine revelation. It's obscure as shit. That's why you might think it's divine. That's also might be why you might dismiss it. All right. So, Moore's proof of the external world. Things like here's a hand and here's another. I'm going to call sentences like that Moore sentences, M sentences. He produced dozens of them in his career. George Edward Moore, G.E. Moore. How about I am closer to the computer than to the window. I live in Pennsylvania. My name is Crispin Sartwell. These are Moore sentences. Now, what's peculiar about Moore sentences? Why he thought he could use sentences like that to prove the existence of the external world? Although it's a comedy act as well as a argument. More is a proof of the existence of the external world. Those appear to be claims which it would be odd. If someone produced a claim like this, like I'm closer to the computer than to the window, or I live in Pennsylvania, in most situations, it would be peculiar to press them for a justification. So, for example, I know that I live in Pennsylvania. Right. I do. Really. It's the kind of thing people do know about themselves. Now, the claim is in knowledge. And Wittgenstein says this over and over again, which is just like straight from Plato or whatever, and like really primitive. I can't believe he didn't critically press on this. Is that if you're gonna claim to know something, you've got to be able to prove it. You've got to, well, I mean, you got to. He has a Wittgenstein. He never takes a position, right? But he appears to have some extremely strong justification condition on knowledge. And as an analysis of what the term know means, like you have to, or he says this over and over, maybe I'll find some passages, but, to know, you have to be able to prove it. Knowing means that there's no possibility that you are wrong. No possibility that you're wrong. Something like that's like a ultimate hyper strong justification condition. And in this, well, the way he justifies it, real quick appeal to usage. That's what we mean. That's it's always legitimate to press someone for their reasons when they claim to know. No, it's not. Okay, and I can't believe he didn't critically press that at all, right? Because he ends up in a complete mess with it, right? So now this is the problem he has with here is a hand and here is another. There's at least one thing outside the mind. My name is Crispin Sartwell, I live in Pennsylvania. That doesn't appear to need a justification. It would be odd to press me for a justification when I tell you that my name is Crispin Sartwell. There could be situations like that where you think I'm lying or whatever it is, all right? Well, in that case, I don't believe it either. So I wouldn't meet the belief condition on knowing that my name is Crispin Sartwell. All right. So these appear to be counterexamples to the JTB, justified true belief account of knowledge, with which Wittgenstein, for no reasons accepts. Right. So that's what this whole book is. It's just like trying to deal with Moore's counterexamples to the JTB analysis of knowledge. Right? All right. So I mean, and I would like to interpret Moore. He doesn't do this actually, but more as an epistemic minimalist. At least the here is a hand and here's another. I'm closer to the computer than to the window. Bookcase to the window, I think, is Moore's example. As real nice arguments for epistemic minimalism. That is deleting the justification condition. All right, so here's what Wittgenstein does as a solution to this. Well, he doesn't give a solution. And by the end, you certainly don't, if you're taking him seriously, you don't think he thinks he's given a solution or anything like this. Here's a hand. My name is Crispin Sartwell. I live in Pennsylvania. I'm closer to the computer than the window. I could produce 1,000 sentences like that right now. And I would say offhand, this is most of what I know actually consists of M sentences. Things are real obvious. Most of what I know consists of M sentences. Right? And if you ask me to justify any of them, in most cases, you'd be casting aspersions on my sanity or something like this. And my response when you press me to justify my claim that I live in Pennsylvania is just going to be like, what? All right. You think you're saying I don't know where I live? All right. Come on. All right. All right. So those are known, apparently known. I wish Wittgenstein was this clear. Those sentences, sentences like that, or propositions like that, are known, but not obviously justified. So now, this is what Wittgenstein does with that. It's the classic sort of David Hume move. There's two kinds of truth. Empirical, or two kinds of propositions. Empirical and analytic, conceptual. Some things are true because they correspond to the way the reality is. Some things are true because of the way the terms fit together. Like, no bachelor is married, something like that, okay? That's not true because of the way the world is. That's true because of the meaning of the word bachelor, and so it's an analytic truth. Now, that's, and Wittgenstein's still completely trapped in this conceptuality, I say. Although interpreting anything in here is difficult, right? And so, to Wittgenstein, it appears that if here is a hand and here's another, or my name is Crispin Sartwell, whatever, aren't empirically justified, don't need to be, sorry, they are, but don't need to be empirically justified, they must be analytic. He doesn't quite say that. What he says is they are conceptual truths. They are logical truths. They are grammatical truths. Here's a hand and here's another is a conceptual truth, a logical truth, a grammatical truth. And so now the first thing to say is absolutely not, right? Like that, here's a hand, or my name is Crispin Sartwell, or I live in Pennsylvania, or I'm closer to the computer than to the window, is not true conceptually. It's not true in virtue of the meaning of the terms. That would be the definition of analytic, for example. Not at all. It's an empirical claim. These are all empirical claims. They're odd empirical claims in a certain way, although they're incredibly non-odd in another way. That is, we do this all the time. People ask me my name, and I say my name, okay? Right. People ask me where I live, or I supply a bio to a publication, and I tell them where I live, right? Okay, so that's the move. We're going to save the justification condition on knowledge. I'm basically reading all this in because he doesn't sequentially argue anything, right? We're going to save the justification condition on knowledge by moving all these typical claims that do not need justification to the conceptual or grammatical side. But that move is completely implausible, all right? What he says is, for anything to be true, something has to stand fast. For anything to be known, something has to stand fast. What stands fast is the grammar or the conceptual or the logical underpinnings or something like that. So if here is a hand has to stand fast, it has to be a grammatical or conceptual truth. But he gives no way to recognize or distinguish grammatical from empirical claims. And as he wrestles with this, he's obviously unsatisfied with his own treatment of it. He says that sentences like here's a hand, M sentences, more sentences, shift back and forth between being empirical claims and being grammatical or conceptual claims, rules of the game. When he says that they are conceptual or logical claims, he means that they are rules of communication. Here is a hand, is a rule of communication. He says, although he's just asking questions, right? He might put a question mark on the end of that. He might put a question mark on the end of that 17 times, so you have no idea what he's saying. Or he's just asking questions, just asking the question, man. But I would say that, first he says these are conceptual truths. These are logical and grammatical truths. And then it occurs to him, as it would, no, they're not. Not at all. What are you talking about, me? And then he goes like, okay, so sometimes they express rules of the game. And in that case, they don't have any empirical content. They are just like rules of usage. Here's a hand. I live in Pennsylvania. I live in Pennsylvania is a rule of usage. And sometimes they're ordinary empirical claims, and sometimes they function as rules of usage. well, they're definitely not rules. Obviously, they're not stated as rules. They're stated as direct, factual claims. Right? They're not rules, but they could be interpreted as rules in the sense of like they're examples of rules. This is a wreck and a mess of an account. Okay, how would I know whether I was uttering a rule of usage or rather making an empirical claim on any particular occasion where I say I live in Pennsylvania? You can't give any guidelines for that. It's completely gratuitous. It's a amazingly ugly violation of Occam's razor, and it's just completely implausible that here is a hand is a rule of usage. Much less that it's a grammatical truth. Now, he goes this far with that. Almost, because Lord knows whether he asserts anything in this book. In this book, which is not his book, okay? It's just a mass of hyper-provisional notes. At 206, he says, if someone asks us, is that true? But is that true? We might say yes to him. And if, like, here's a hand. Is that true? Yes. And if you demanded grounds, we might say, I can't give you any grounds. But if you learn more, you too will think that, little Crispy lives in Pennsylvania or whatever. If this didn't come about, that would mean he couldn't, for example, learn history. So as so many passages in this book, I have no idea how to interpret that. Okay, but I have some idea. I say what he's saying there in 206, paragraph 206, as numbered by others, is that it's here is a hand is neither true nor false. It functions as a conceptual rule. Rules aren't exactly true or false, are they? Not exactly. So if it's a rule, it's neither true nor false. If it's neither true nor false, maybe it's not something that could be known. All right, so this means that I live in Pennsylvania is not something that could be known. I live in Pennsylvania is something that's neither true nor false. So the first question is he taking that position? And the second is, if he is, no. No, this is ridiculously bad. It's hyper incompetent, is my opinion. I don't know. I'll give you some little bits of this. Let's try this. I know, this is paragraph 288. I know, not just the earth existed long before my birth. These are Moore examples, and that's a Moore sentence produced by G.E. Moore. I know that the earth existed long before my birth. But also that it is a large body, that this has been established, that I and the rest of mankind have forebears, that there are books about all this, that such books don't lie, etc., etc., etc. Those are all Moore sentences. And I know all this? And I know all this? ? I believe it. Period. The body of knowledge has been handed on to me, and I have no grounds for doubting it, but on the contrary, all sorts of confirmation. And why shouldn't I say that I know all this? Isn't that what one does say? Yes, it is. But Wittgenstein, does he say it? Does he not? He says it, and he doesn't say it. He says it and takes it back. He says it, and then he tacks a question mark on the end of it. So I know all this? ? Which indicates no, he doesn't know all this at all. I know all this? Question mark? What do you mean? I know that the earth existed long before my birth? Yes, you do. Okay? Like, why fuck with that, dude? Like, what? Much less moving it off into the realm of conceptual truth or something like that, which is just, it's the worst kind of desperate move. But again, if this was a considered argument that sometimes here is a hand or the earth existed long before my birth functions as a conceptual truth, a rule of usage, and sometimes it functions as an empirical claim, in the first case, it cannot be known, and it is neither true nor false. This is about as bad as epistemology has ever gotten, really. These are not plausible positions. By the time they assemble the later fragments, you can see that he can see this too. So he gets to this. 531. But now, isn't it correct to describe my present state as follows? I know what this color is called in English. I know that he's working on a series of more sentences now that go like, I know that that's blue. And then a little further, I know what blue means in English. I know what that color is called in English. And if this is correct, then why then should I not describe my state with the corresponding words I know? Why not? Well, I just did. Like, this is really messed up writing. But anyway, yeah, why not? Just say, I know that that wall is blue. And I know what the word blue means in English, roughly or whatever. It's, however much content color words have. All right, I want to say that. Does Wittgenstein want to allow me to say that? Yes and no. No and yes. No, 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 no. Absolutely not. Yes, 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 of course. That's his answer. No, 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 absolutely not. Yes, 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 of course. Now, isn't it correct to describe my present state as follows? I know what this color is called in English. And if that is correct, then why should I not describe my state with the corresponding words I know? Well, I just did. Okay. So, when Moore sat in front of a tree and said, I know that that's a tree, he was simply stating the truth about his state at that time. And they could have been sitting in the quad at Cambridge, right? Moore and Wittgenstein. Moore, when he's sitting on the quad in Cambridge with Wittgenstein, says, look, that's a tree. I know that that's a tree. He was simply stating the truth about his state. Well, if it was correct to describe his state out of context, then it was just as correct to utter the words, that's a tree, out of context. So yes. All right, so, and he doesn't go anywhere from there. He doesn't then decide that I can show that's false or something like that. He appears to affirm with Moore that Moore knows that that's a tree. Okay, right there. That even when you yank it out of context or put it in an unusual context, a M sentence can be true and can be known. And then he says, I do philosophy now like an old woman who is always mislaying something and having to look for it again. Now her spectacles, now her keys. And he just found the keys. Which is that he knows that the wall is blue. And he knows the meaning of the word blue in English. At any rate, I guess there's many more passages that I sort of had marked, or I just want to maybe summarize my critique of uncertainty. It should never have been assembled into a book. It doesn't amount to the kind of extended, interesting discussions that you find in the investigations, for example, or even some of the other posthumous works. It doesn't coalesce into a definite position. It experiments with positions that are really ridiculous. like the idea that here's a hand and here's another is a conceptual truth. Um, it doesn't land on any useful direction to begin to answer these questions. Um, it doesn't richly describe the usage of these terms in ordinary language. And the main thing I would say about that is that he violates ordinary language immediately by putting extremely strong justification conditions on knowledge over and over again. And then he's in a conundrum because he's aware that that's not how he used the word know. But so he doesn't consistently use his own ordinary language insights or his own view that meaning is use. He leaves the uses of know behind and weights it down with the whole of Western epistemology, that is, the gigantic justification condition in its strongest forms. Like, I cannot possibly be wrong if I know. All right. He's hypnotized by the history of Western epistemology in a way that should shock you with Wittgenstein. Eventually, he might have tried to address epistemology somewhat like the way Austin did in Sense and Sensibilia, by actually feeling and carefully trying to analyze the ordinary uses of these terms, or really carefully saying why, when Moore says here's a hand or here's another, I'm standing closer to the bookcase than the window, that he's violating usage in a way that conceptually vitiates his claims. As it is, though, uncertainty doesn't even tell you whether Wittgenstein agrees that Moore knows that here's a hand and here's another. So I know this? That's what we leave. That's all we have. And it's, all right, so anyway, it's a wreck of a book. And if you're construing it as an argument or a sketch of this terrain, epistemology, it's an incredibly contradictory wreck, okay? So anyway, that's my rant on uncertainty.